Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
Chris, you and I are both parents now, and I think you may agree that it maybe has given you a new perspective on things, especially working in news, not just in your own personal life, but for me personally, for example, I think when I became a parent, it made me pay attention a little more, and it gave me a different perspective on even my empathy on how things work in our society, and particularly in the subject of child welfare.
Yeah, I would say that is very true. My first week with my son was spent in the NICU, and it was not an experience I ever thought I would have, but then, getting to see a lot of the people around in that facility just, I think, was one example of coming face to face with the realization that there are a lot of different people who have a lot of different challenges in their life. For sure.
Yeah, and you got to see a whole system, basically, in working that you probably hadn't seen before.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
It's interesting. Our topic today focuses on a different and very specific aspect of child welfare in New Mexico. I want to just bring in our guest right away. She's the executive director of New Mexico Kids Matter, a nonprofit here in New Mexico that works with children in Bernalillo County. Jennifer Sunshine, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a treat.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Let's start just high level, get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what exactly you do.
As the executive director of New Mexico Kids Matter, I oversee the entire program aspect of the organization, and my hope is to get a little bit more noticed in the community. My background is in nonprofit operations, and I came to this organization hoping that I could help build this program into what it can possibly be for the best interest of the kids of Bernalillo County. Right now, I think we're the best kept secret, and so my job is to change that.
Yeah. So let's talk just a little bit about what New Mexico Kids Matter does. Your website describes the organization as advocates for children who've been abused or neglected by empowering community volunteers to speak up for them in the foster care system. It goes on to say CASA volunteers serve as a person they can count on for compassion, guidance, advocacy, and information. So what led you to working with this group, and why do you do it personally, along with, do you feel like that accurately describes the mission here as well? I mean, it is from the website, but so I imagine you do. But.
Absolutely, yes. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for a good chunk of my career, and I've had experience working with homeless families with custody of minor children. I've worked with other youth programs. I've worked with health organizations. I've also worked in the domestic violence realm. Everything intersects in child welfare. All of the ills of society affect the children who are subject to the foster care system. So I really enjoy working in a trauma-informed environment in community-based services because I believe that as a community, the most important thing that we have to offer each other is support and advocacy. This particular mission spoke to my heart very much because it's a real practical way that individuals in the community can get engaged and actually change the life of a child who has experienced trauma.
Yeah, so you all, New Mexico Kids Matter, that is, hold the contract for CASA. That stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate when we say the word CASA in Bernalillo County. So how does that work exactly? How does somebody from NM Kids Matter get connected with a child's case in the system?
Well, first they would submit an application and then go through an interview process with our training manager to talk out the actual role and responsibilities of the CASA. The court-appointed special advocate role is a program that exists nationwide. As you said, we operate the program in Bernalillo County, and what that volunteer's job is, once they're assigned to a case, is to get to know the child who has been removed from custody and is in CYFT custody, and they get to know the child's life experiences, the parents, the foster parents, the school, the teachers, doctors, everyone in this child's life, and what their role is to prepare a court report and provide recommendations to the judge in the child's best interest. So to get involved in that program, they would apply, and then they would go through a screening interview to make sure it's a good fit. It's a pretty robust volunteer position, so we do have a screening process. And then there's a very extensive training process to get onboarded into the program and understand what you're doing. And then there's also on-service training that happens once they're appointed by a judge. But all the pre-service training has to be completed before they are appointed by a judge in a case.
So once they're already in the system, say one of your volunteers now, though, how do they get connected to a kid's case?
They have to come through our program in order to be connected to that case.
And then a judge will assign the volunteers, or who assigns them?
We technically assign, which is basically a recommendation to the court, but the judge actually makes the appointment order in the case.
Got it.
What makes that person, when they're appointed, why do you feel they are uniquely positioned to do that work? Because I think in some ways people may look at the system and say that, well, there's probably already a lot of other people around the investigation of what is going on, right? There's folks in CYFD, sometimes there's folks in the prosecution office, or even investigators with a law enforcement agency. But what makes this advocate uniquely positioned to do this work?
Great question. And I think one of the most important aspects of the role of CASA, to be honest with you, you're right. There are a lot of adults in that room when a child goes to a hearing when they've been removed from custody. There's the judge. There are the respondent or the parent who has lost custody. If their attorney is present, the youth attorney is present, guardian ad litem might be present, the CYFD staff is present. And every adult in that conversation has a job to do. They have a role. And it's a critical role in the process of making sure that child gets what they need. But the one thing that a CASA volunteer does is they've got their eyes on the child's best interest. The best example that I can use to differentiate would be, imagine a teenager who might be legally old enough to ask for emancipation, and their youth attorney would want to do that for them because it would be their legal right. But who's looking at the child to determine what's best for this child? And that's the CASA's role. So in that sphere of all of these adults making decisions about this child's life, this volunteer is getting to know the child so they can speak up for their best interest. And that is their primary focus, and their only focus is the child's best interest.
Okay. So as I understand it, about 8 people work in the New Mexico office here for New Mexico Kids Matter. There are around 60 volunteers, though. How does that track with the need here in Bernalillo County compared to how many kids are sort of in the system that could use services?
That's the hard part of our story. We're barely scratching the surface. The most recent numbers that I looked at, there were almost 900 children in CYFD custody in Bernalillo County, with cases in Bernalillo County. So we're serving a little over 100 of those. So it's just not good enough. We believe that every single child in the system should have a CASA. And unfortunately, since the pandemic, volunteerism has been a little bit down, and we're just starting to rally back up to try and recruit some new volunteers because the need is great.
Yeah, you mentioned when we were previously talking that volunteers are severely needed, but this is obviously like not an easy volunteer position, it sounds like. You mentioned that it's just volunteerism is down in general since the pandemic. Why do you think that is?
Well, in general, the nonprofit sector is suffering for volunteers, and that's every nonprofit has been going through it. And I think times are just tough. The economy has shifted, people's responsibilities have shifted, and people just don't have the same availability. So I think that that's one thing. Another thing that we've seen in the CASA world, the decline in volunteerism has happened nationally, and I think that there's a struggle in smaller nonprofits for recruitment endeavors. I know that we've had a few ourselves over the last few years, just working with the community, trying to increase our public footprint. So again, thank you for doing this today as helping. But it's also it's a time commitment for this particular role. It's not a roll up your sleeves at the holiday season and do one or two things, which is great and very needed. But this is the role that, we have some volunteers that have been on their cases for years. So up front, we do ask for an 18-month commitment. But generally speaking, a lot of our cases go on beyond that.
Wow.
And the reason that we certainly don't want to deter anybody that's interested in volunteering, but it's very important for us to screen properly up front and let people know what to expect, because very, very often the CASA in the case is the most consistent human being in that child's life for years, and that's saying something. So when we select a volunteer for a case, we want it to be a good fit.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice. The state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on krqe.com or our YouTube channel.
And how many hours are you usually asking, of the volunteer? If we can say per month or per, I don't know.
Generally between 15 and 20 hours a month, but it really can vary depending on the case. Some cases have one child, some is a group of siblings, things like that. So we do talk to the volunteers in the beginning to find out if a sibling group is more appropriate or an individual child is more appropriate. So we cover a lot of that in our screening, but on average we'd say about 15 to 20 hours a month.
And I guess we can speculate why volunteerism is down since the pandemic. I know, just volunteering at my child's school, we're hearing a lot of conversations among parents of it used to be that at least one parent could be a kind of stay-at-home parent and the other one worked full-time. Nowadays, it seems like more households are dual working parents full-time. And I wonder if that has anything to do with volunteerism being down. But also, just to ask you, historically, did your volunteers seem like retirees mostly who could do this work, or what was the demographic of your volunteers?
Yes, I think you're on to something, and that would stand for the whole nonprofit sector as well. Volunteers do largely come from the retired sector. Our demographics, we really want to recruit and train and appoint volunteers that represent the children's backgrounds as well, because it's very important that the volunteers understand the life and the importance of culture and the family background. So we've been working really hard to recruit a diverse set of volunteers, but there are some demographics that are consistent among all nonprofits of who has the time to volunteer. So it's always a challenge to get out there and find other folks that can relate to the kids really well. But I think that there's an important level in the retirees that are joining as volunteers in the nonprofit sector. And that goes for everybody as well, because they do have the time, they do have the wisdom of their years, and that it's a really good thing to put in play, especially in a program like ours, because that wisdom, that kind of know how to advocate for yourself and others, that's a skill that our advocates really need. So there really can be a benefit of any retiree that's interested in a volunteer position like this also.
Yeah. I think as you outlined, it is a big lift for the volunteers, something that's critically needed, saying, it's an 18-month time commitment at a minimum, but many times these cases can last for years. But importantly, these are very consistent people in that child's life. And so I'm curious, getting to know this child's case, speak on their behalf in court, in front of a judge. What kind of training goes into that to get somebody ready to do that work as a CASA volunteer?
Well, our training, as I had said, is pretty involved. Our pre-service training is about 30 hours worth of training, and we go into a lot of different aspects of trauma and what that means to the child. We also cover all of our core competencies of our program. It is a national program, so there are set program guidelines that we do follow to make sure that we're advocating in the proper way. We cover child welfare system in a nutshell, how to write court reports, things like that. But most of it is geared towards having that volunteer really in that frame of mind that they can understand that child, know how to talk to the child, how to talk to the families, and get more information. So there's a lot of that sensitivity, awareness training about what they might be experiencing. We find that a lot of volunteers think that they might know what they're headed for, but some of these children have experienced some of the worst situations that humanity has experienced, right? So you're talking about lay people that aren't necessarily social workers coming into play with that. So the pre-service training is really focused on that awareness level to make sure that that's something the volunteer's really comfortable talking about and around. And then the in-service training is once they've been through that and they're appointed to a specific case, our staff works directly one-on-one with that volunteer to onboard them into the case, go to the first visits with everybody, and go through really one-on-one training at that point to make sure that they're really crystal clear on the case and the parameters and have all the correct contacts and process.
How much time does a CASA get with a child to get to know them, like outside of court?
Our CASAs are required to meet with the child a minimum of once a month. We do prefer it if they can meet face-to-face so they can build that relationship, but every case is really different. We have some CASAs that meet multiple times a month, that go on adventures together and do all kinds of things. We have some that meet through Zoom because that's the only way that it's possible. Some children are in kinship guardians, so they might be with a family member that's outside of Bernalillo County, so there might be travel involved. So there's a lot of different dynamics about meeting, but at minimum once a month.
Okay. And then you all are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, but still with funding needs. How is NM Kids Matter funded exactly, and what does that money help pay for?
Well, about 80% of our funding does pay for our program. Most of our staff is direct program staff, so they're administering the program directly. We're funded through federal grants, state funded as well through the Administrative Office of the Courts. We also have quite a number of local foundations that support our cause, some corporations, some local businesses, and then individual donors as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned big federal funding, grants, obviously. Is any of the funding for NM Kids Matter under threat or uncertainty at the moment? We've been talking to other nonprofits who were sort of worried about that. How is your organization doing?
A little bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah.
So our national organization, we did have a federal grant through OJJDP that was a pass-through the national organization. We were one of 3 CASA programs in the state that had that funding that was terminated by the Department of Justice several months ago. The national organization did appeal that decision, and they did win. So this is very recent development. So our funding, which was for recruitment, by the way, we didn't expend all of that fully. So now we're just waiting for the details of the logistics about how to access those funds now that it's been reinstated. We do also receive VOCA funding, which is Victims of Crime Act funding. Many organizations throughout the state receive that as well. We weren't sure how that was going to go because of what had happened with the other, but that apparently seems to be working out fine for us right now. I think the hardest part is just navigating the uncertainty.
And the need to sort of diversify funds.
Absolutely.
Generally is a conversation.
It really is. In the nonprofit sector, the best way that you can look at your budget is to try and have a healthy balance of funding sources, through grants, through foundations, through individual donors, fundraising, and so on. And, our organization can do a little bit better on the fundraising side. We haven't done too many of those events historically, so we're looking at changing our strategy up this next year and, kind of trying to diversify because we're at a place with our program where, as we talked about earlier, we're not serving enough children, but we're also sort of maxed out on our budget. And there are parameters to how many cases each one of our staff member can oversee. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. We need more funding so we can hire more staff, and we need more staff so we can help more kids. So we're working through that, and I think over the next couple of years, our goal would be to diversify our funding a little bit better so that we can expand in a more healthy manner.
be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hey guys, Chad Brummett here with New Mexico Frontiers, the KRQE original series that focuses on tech and innovation happening right here in New Mexico. We've got a lot of great stories about various businesses, technology, and of course space exploration. So make sure that you follow us on air at KRQE and Fox New Mexico, as well as our KRQE YouTube channel online. In the meantime, let's get back to the New Mexico News Insiders.
We have talked about on this podcast, going to a different topic here, about the criticism CYFD gets and how it handles cases with children who've either been abused or neglected or taken from the homes of their parents for either of those reasons. Your volunteers, to some extent, they get to work with CYFD caseworkers as well as attorneys, for example, that may be assigned to a juvenile in the court system. That is right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And just to ask as well, how does a court-appointed advocate differ from either one of those parties, CYFD working with folks in the court system? What can you guys do differently for a child than either CYFD or their attorney can do?
CYFD steps in when they remove a child from custody as their legal guardian. So they're responsible for making certain decisions at that point. We do not do that. We do not have the ability to make those guardianship decisions for that child. The attorneys for CYFD are going to be filing motions and doing the work on behalf of CYFD's representation of that child, whereas again, our interest is in the best interest of the child, purely just the best interest of the child. So our volunteers do communicate with the permanency placement worker from CYFD and everybody else on that child's case. The legal parties is what it's called. So that's going to be every legal party to the case our CASA will interact with. And it can be frustrating. CYFD does have challenges. And I'm not here to speak about that today, but what I do want to highlight is that while I think there's a lot of attention placed on the problems in the child welfare system, it's not the only story. There are some great things and there are some great people that are trying to affect change from within. And I think that it's important to recognize that because our team works alongside a lot of employees from CYFD that don't make the larger decisions, that can't control the bigger problems, but they're doing everything from their position to try and help the children. And I think it's important to recognize that. Our staff and our team works alongside those people, and we recognize the challenges that they have, and some days are great and some days are not, but we are, again, just trying to affect change positively from a different angle.
Yeah. Having such a shortage, though, of court-appointed volunteer advocates, how do you all decide which children or child gets those resources when the resources are so limited?
It's one of the hardest things that we have to decide, honestly. The first, we do take requests from the children's court judges. We will prioritize their requests over everybody else. And the reason for that is because our CASAs are there to be eyes for the judge. So if a judge feels that they need a CASA on that case, they clearly need those eyes, and we determine that they're the priority. So if a judge makes a request, we do our best to fill those requests as soon as possible. We do take requests from all of the different legal parties, including CYFD, the youth attorneys, and anyone else that's involved. But my program manager, she reviews every single affidavit of every child that goes into the system, and she categorizes them based on need.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot, I imagine.
It is a lot. I have 2 employees that have read the affidavits of every child that has gone into the system, and that is a weight that, all I can say is my staff is really phenomenal for what they do, and they put their heart and soul in it, but they don't make those decisions about who to appoint lightly.
Mm-hmm. We know that much of what you do is confidential, not being able to share the names directly of the, individuals that you service and help. But without getting too specific, I wanted to see if there was an example of perhaps a case in your years working for this organization where having a CASA in that child's case really made a difference for that child?
You know, I can tell you a story that I heard about just last week. We have a new volunteer that trained, and he does have a mental health background. And so my team selected the best choice for him. And he met the child one day after some dialogue back and forth with the foster parents. This child was nonverbal, that has some autism and effects of trauma, and at this point was completely nonverbal and didn't touch anyone. And they were prepared. Everybody, like I said, my team works hand in hand with our volunteers, especially as they're getting started. So when they went out on the very first meet with this child, they met at a park and just sat and visited. And well, I won't tell you too much about the conversation, but what I will tell you is that at the end of that first meeting, the child slipped their hand into this volunteer's hand and thanked them. So I think even just after one meeting, this child realized that there was some safety in that conversation, and the volunteer had really expressed enough to the child to build that trust instantly. Now, that doesn't happen every single time, but this was really proof positive that having the right adult person in a situation can change the trajectory of a child who's experiencing trauma.
Yeah, that's very powerful for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that was a good one. That felt good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So the child said thank you to the volunteer
in their own way.
In a way.
Yes.
Okay. So New Mexico Kids Matter holds the contract, obviously, for court-appointed special advocates for children in Bernalillo County, which we all know we're a very busy county when it comes to the court system. But there are 33 counties in New Mexico. Do all of them have advocates like this for children?
Most of them do. There is a state-level organization that coordinates information for all of the programs across New Mexico. And so if somebody's looking for a CASA program in a different county, they could go to the New Mexico CASA website and find a program closest to them. They could also Google CASA program in their county and find it directly. But yes, there's 13 programs across the state, all looking for CASA volunteers.
Wow.
If someone is listening here thinking, maybe I have some time for this and I want to get involved, or maybe they can just support the mission, what's the first step they should take?
Well, visit our website, submit a volunteer application, send us an email, give us a call. Just reach out, really. Just reach out. There are a lot of ways to help, and I like to get to know the people that want to help to find out how it can be the best fit for everybody involved. Helping the world around us feels good. We all feel good when we do it, and we should have a great relationship with those that put together those kinds of services. So the best place is just a conversation with our staff about what you're interested in, how you're interested in supporting us. There's lots of ways.
Is there anything we're missing or that you want to add, want people to better understand about what you all do?
Oh, gosh. Well, I could keep you all day on that one, but, in addition to the CASA program, we do a few other things to help support the kids in foster care. And so we do a back to school drive where we provide, and this is for any child in Bernalillo County that's in the foster care system, not just with a CASA. So we provide them with a $100 gift card and a shopping spree and some other school supplies. This year we gave them a bag full of supplies and some backpacks. And we try and do the same thing at the holidays and something similar. But we also try and find referrals to services or other options. So we do have a lot of organizations that will donate things to us. For example, we have a large donation of coats and shoes on their way to us that we'll be looking for a fun way to disseminate to the children in care coming up too. So we try and find other ways to get to all of the kids, but we're not going to give up on our goal of a CASA for every child in the system.
Okay. Well, Jennifer Sunshine, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's really been a treat. Thank you so much for sharing our story. We really appreciate it. And I appreciate both of you for what you do with all the nonprofits out there that need assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, a thanks to the Executive Director of New Mexico Kids Matter, that being Jennifer Sunshine, joining us here today for a conversation about the CASA program here locally, which obviously, as we've reported many different episodes about the threads of the child abuse problem here in New Mexico. You can tell it's a program that certainly there's much more of a need for here.
Yeah, and it seems like a perfect opportunity if you care about this issue and want to help in the life of a child who really needs, a good adult advocating for them. This is a great way to do that. So we will link to their program in our show notes. And again, this is a nationwide program, so it's across the nation. It was a whole program started by a judge, Jennifer was telling me as I walked her out the door. So super interesting stuff. If you all have any story ideas or people you'd like to hear from on our show, always feel free and reach out. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media.
I'm at Chris McKee TV, also chris.mckee@krqe.com. Leave us a comment on Spotify or a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate you listening and watching. Thank you.